Welcome to Fan at the Fence and my preview for round 4 of the 2023 Supercars Championship. Now if you recognise my voice but not the name or logo that you're seeing on screen, do not get confused. This is my first video since I renamed the channel from Behind the Barrier to Fan at the Fence, which it will be known as moving forward. But it's just a fresh lick of paint, we're still all about that Supercars content, so let's get stuck into everything you need to know ahead of this weekend. So Tasmania is our destination this weekend, specifically Symmons Plains Raceway, a historic track located about 30 kilometres outside of Launceston, and despite being on the other side of the country, the circuit actually shares some similarities, at least in terms of stats, with the last event in Perth. Like Wanneroo Raceway, this track is also about 2.4 k's in length. It also features 7 turns, just like Perth, but that's about where the similarities stop. Its direction is anti-clockwise, and I would personally say the risk around here is a little bit higher than Perth. I put it as medium, but that might be a little bit conservative. It's actually probably on the higher end, especially if it rains. A lap around here is fast and furious, so let's take a look at the key corners. Turn 1 comes up right away, and it's a kink to the right that feeds straight into turn 2. This area of the track is normally pretty single file after lap 1, but still prone to causing many mistakes. Your exit from turn 2 is super important because it leads you onto a big flat out section, but on your route to the hairpin you're going to negotiate turn 3, which is a gentle kink to the right, but if it's wet or you're side by side with someone, this corner can be a bit of a handful. That leads us on to probably the most famous corner on this track and one of my personal favourites on the entire Supercars calendar. Turn 4, a really tight hairpin, only about 60 k's an hour in Supercars, that is just so iconic and always leads to some fantastic action. It's really important to get a good exit out of the hairpin because it leads you on to an even faster section of the racetrack that will see you go through the gentle right-hander of turn 5 and down to the next key overtaking opportunity at turn 6. After that, you go through the next left-hander of turn 7, and before you know it, you're starting another lap around this great little racetrack. If you're heading trackside or are just watching Supercars around Symmons Plains for the first time, I would say there are 3 main spots to watch. The first one is turn 1, because you're braking and turning at the same time here, and then on top of that, you've got a really aggressive hump in the road, which makes the cars go light. We saw lots of mistakes at this section of the track, even with the high downforce cars of Gen 2. So with the lower downforce we have with Gen 3, I suspect we're going to see even more drama at this section of the circuit. Turn 4 is my next spot to watch for a multitude of reasons. I've already mentioned that it's a key overtaking location, but there's a lot more going on as well. The high speed entry means that this is a bit of a gauntlet in qualifying, and we often see lockups going into the hairpin. On lap 1, we also see the field concertina and close up a lot at this section of the track, which can lead to clumsy nose to tail contact and sometimes even pile-ups on the exit. And then on top of that, because of the elevation around the hairpin, you can realistically take low and high lines, a bit like NASCAR, and have some really good racing on the exit. Turn 6 is my final spot to watch, not so much because of the corner itself, but because of what happens in the build-up to it. If a car gets pushed wide through turn 5, they often end up on the grass and actually come back across the circuit out of control down here at T6. That's led to some pretty scary close calls over the years and even some pretty bad accidents as well, so fingers crossed we don't see any of that this weekend. That leads us to the segment of the show called Last Time Out, where I look back on Supercars' last visit to each race location. And last time they were at Symmons Plains, it was a clean sweep for Shane Van Gisbergen winning all 3 races, and the stat sheet suggests that was a boring weekend, but it was anything but. We saw lots of controversy and really aggressive racing. Probably the biggest talking point was Shane Van Gisbergen's door bumping technique, where he would run into the side of his rivals on the exit of the hairpin in a bid to slow their exit speed and get past on the big long back straight. This raised some question marks on exactly what the stewards class as a bump and run, but from memory it was deemed okay, so I'm really curious to see if anyone else adopts that technique this weekend. Keeping the theme of contact going, we saw a big accident at the final corner between Andre Heimgardner and Jack LeBrock. Those two tangled trying to go through that final segment of the racetrack, which led to both of them being buried in the wall and a delay thanks to a red flag. We also saw a massive moment from Tim Slade as he tried to go around the outside of Cameron Waters at turn 5, and this resulted in the exact threat I mentioned down at turn 6, where he came back across the racetrack but fortunately did not clean anyone else up in the process. That's all in the history books though, so let's turn our attention to this weekend and the format. Friday will only see on-track action from the support categories, but Supercars will hit the track on Saturday for practice 1 and 2, and then a 3-part qualifying session to set the grid for race 1. Sunday, a bit like Perth, sees the return to the more traditional qualifying format for races 2 and 3 of the weekend, and then of course those races finish off the proceedings. In terms of weather, it's going to be cold but consistent. It's going to be partly cloudy on Friday, Saturday and Sunday, and the max temp is going to hover around the sort of 11 to 14 degree mark. Very, very chilly, so I tip my hat to anyone that's going to be trackside. A quick catch up of the headlines since Supercars were out in Perth. It's been revealed that Champ van Gisbergen's contract renewal is only for a single year. Red Bull originally claimed that was a multi-year agreement, but Champ van Gisbergen has since come out and said it to be 1 year. I imagine there's a option there for him to extend pretty easily, but that disparity between SVG and the team was pretty interesting to look at. Supercars are also potentially going to see a new venue join the calendar in future seasons, with a new circuit planned near Avalon Airport in Victoria. That's sort of tipped to be a replacement for Sandown, which is likely and sadly going to be demolished in the coming years. And Supercars have also been over to New Zealand, this time visiting Taupo, which is apparently the leading candidate for the return of a New Zealand round in 2024. The deadline for that agreement to be sorted apparently is only a few weeks away, so fingers crossed we get some news on that one soon. And then finally, Walkinshaw Andretti United have unfortunately also abandoned their plans to run a wildcard at this year's Enduros, which is seeing Warren Luff, their sort of co-driver who is lined up, actually get snapped up by Team 18 for this year's Enduros. Obviously, we're at the start of a new set of regulations, so I've got a segment of the show called GEN3 Watch, where I try to keep up with some of the updates either on the new cars or coming in the near future. Now, the first point I've got here is the question mark around the gear tower failures we saw in Perth, where the gear sticks, pretty much as I understand, just snapped straight off the chassis. Obviously a critical failure, and I haven't heard any sort of teams speak about any of their fixes to remedy this going into Tassie, so I'm sure they have made some changes to sort that issue, but I'd be really curious to see what they've done to hopefully avoid the problem. Another piece of news is that all the cars are going to be running a slightly updated drop gear ratio this weekend to make sure that they don't run out of breath down Tasmania's long back straight. I must admit, I was a bit surprised to see this news come out. Obviously, if the cars need the change, you've got to put it in there, but in a generation where they're trying to cut costs, I was a little surprised to see sort of bespoke settings coming for individual racetracks. Obviously, Tassie is a bit of an outlier, but I'm sure they're hoping that they're not going to have to change these drop gear ratios too often throughout the season. Now, my last 2 points here I need to stress are rumours only at this stage, but they have been reported by reputable sources like Speed Cafe. The first rumour is that both the Chev and the Ford might be running updated engine maps this weekend as Supercars continue to tweak and fine-tune the performance of the two engines. I'm sure we'll get official word on that in the coming days if it is happening. And the other rumour is that Supercars might be investigating further dyno testing and more advanced dyno testing at a facility in Melbourne to hopefully either find or allay concerns about a potential disparity between the Ford and the Chev engine. Once again, something to watch over the coming weeks. Alright, let's get into some predictions for this weekend of racing, beginning with my own. Now, these are just a bit of fun. I just like to throw some things out there and then come back to them and see how I performed in each of my round reviews. Now, Perth was a disaster for me. I got 0 out of 3, but for Tassie, I'm predicting we're going to see a shock pole position in at least one of the races. So that's either a driver that's normally down the back end or the midfield. And this is on the back of the fact Tassie is just such a short and fast circuit that we often do see the tiniest of margins and sometimes some surprising performances towards the front of the grid. My second prediction is that we will see a win for James Courtney. I think a bit like Cameron Waters in Perth, this might be sort of heart over head on this one, but given the rough start those guys had to the start of the season, I would really like to see JC pick up a win in Tassie, and he did put a pretty strong performance down in Perth, so hopefully they're on the right track. And my final prediction is that we will see a high-profile teammate collision. Now, when I say high-profile, I'm going to class that either as drivers from a top team like Red Bull or Erebus coming together, or a bigger accident in a team that isn't quite towards towards the pointy end of things. Basically, any accident between teammates that causes a lot of drama or controversy or talk on social media or in the mainstream media, I will count as a win for me on this one. And this is off the back of just a really aggressive racing we always see around Tasmania. Shane van Gisbergen and Brock Feeney got pretty close and aggressive when they were racing each other around here last year, so that's what's inspired this prediction. When the cars are so expensive, I genuinely hope that I don't get a tick on this prediction. But as always, I like to ask you guys for your predictions as well and feature some of them here in my videos. So if you want to take part in little polls and opinion pieces like this, be sure to subscribe and keep an eye out for my community posts. But Max Jones predicts that a Ford driver will take their first on-track win of the season. Now, as I've said a few times, obviously Cam Waters picked up the opening race win in Newcastle, but that was after a disqualification for Red Bull. So he's predicting the first on-track win for a Ford, which I would personally love to see as well, even as a Chev fan, because I really want to see this rivalry ignite between the two brands. Mabini Games put out the prediction that SVG will win. Now, I pushed him to get a bit more specific, asking if he thought he'd get another clean sweep or just win some of the races, and Mabini specified thinking Shane van Gisbergen will just get one victory and that the other two races might go to somebody else. I really hope this prediction is correct, because it means hopefully we're in for another competitive and exciting weekend of racing. And our last prediction comes from Curry Pie, who's hoping that Chaz can either get a podium or maybe even a win. And I would really like to see this. I think this would be a popular victory. He obviously got so close in that second race in Newcastle. WAU have kind of dropped off form a little bit since then, so fingers crossed they can bounce back and be towards the sharp end of things this weekend in Tassie. In addition to supercars, we're going to have some good support categories on the track. This was something that got criticised for being a bit lackluster at the 2022 race for supercars, so it's good to see that they've improved a little bit and taking a step in the right direction. So we're also going to see the Porsche GT3 Cup Challenge on track in Tassie. We're also going to see Formula Ford Aussie racing cars who are running their high downforce package for the rest of the season, so expect plenty of slipstreaming battles there. And then finally Tassie Tin Tops, which always has a great mix of cars as well. Looking at the big picture, we've got a pretty exciting championship battle brewing that I really hope follows through to the end of the season. We've got Brody Kostecki still leading the way at the top, followed by Chaz Mostert, who I said, WAU have dropped off a bit in recent races, but he's still very much at the pointy end of things in the Drivers' Championship. Shane van Gisbergen up there in third, not too far behind Will Brown, and Brock Feeney as well there in fifth. On the team side of things, we have Erebus still leading the way after a pretty strong performance in Perth, followed not too far behind by Red Bull and Pole Racing, and Penrite also doing a really good job up there on the team's front in third. And with that, we will bring my Tasmania preview to a close. I'm really looking forward to this weekend of racing. Tassie is just one of those classic racetracks that I think is a real cornerstone of the championship, so I'm really looking forward to the action around there. Super excited to see how Gen 3 behaves as well, and of course a big thank you to everyone for your support with the recent name change to the channel. We've got some other key improvements coming as well. I'm hoping to include a bit more imagery in my videos in the near future, so keep an eye out for that. And of course, if you haven't subscribed already but you do love your supercars, please do hit that sub button and turn on notifications if you want to make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. But until then, enjoy the weekend of racing. Keep an eye out for polls and different things I'm going to put up to get your opinion on things as well, and I will see you in the round review very, very soon.